Your Excellency, the President of Ghana, Your Excellency, the Prime Minister of Guinea, Your Excellency, the Foreign Minister of Ethiopia, captains of industry, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me the warmest pleasure to welcome you to the 5th edition of the Africa CEO Forum here in Geneva, Switzerland. My name is Lerato Mbele, and I'm a presenter on BBC World News. I must just say that in this trumped-up world that we live in, I'm really proud to be working for the BBC because I can assure you we are still a news organization that reports the real news, not fake news. And as we cover this event, together with fellow journalists, there will be no alternative facts. I think it's very important and symbolic that we are in Geneva this year. Firstly, perhaps a disclaimer. I have hosted the plenary sessions for the Africa CEO Forum for 4 out of the 5 years. I am not on a retainer. I have grown from your tutelage and knowledge. And from my own observations, I've seen the forum really grow in stature with the caliber of delegates and participants, the level of conversation that we're having about Africa, and the passion. So I'm really proud that we have reached the 5-year milestone, and I want to congratulate the team from the Africa CEO Forum and indeed the African Development Bank. But there was a time when we were debating whether this forum should be held in Switzerland, if it's an Africa CEO Forum, and we've had that debate, we've run the full gamut of that conversation. But I think in 2017, it's apt that the forum has returned to Geneva. And I'll tell you why. We're living in a world of so much uncertainty. There's this rising tide of populism. There's this fear, protectionism. And I think it's very important that as Africans, we remind the world that we share a common humanity with them. That as Africans, we have something to contribute to the development of the world at large. And that there is no Europe without Africa, and there is no Africa without Europe or the West. So I think symbolically, 2017's 5th edition of the Africa CEO Forum is right to be in Geneva, Switzerland, and I thank you all for making the time and the effort to be here. I'm also going to do something, I'm going to take the liberty to do something as the moderator of the first session. May I ask all our young CEOs under the age of 40, please stand up. Indeed, they deserve an applause, they deserve recognition, because over the next 2 days of your deliberations, these are the people who really matter. These are the disruptors, the game changers who are shaping the future of Africa. It's to this audience that we really need to be speaking. But over and above the youth, may I ask the women CEOs and leaders to please stand up. I think they deserve a rousing applause, even more. Yes, it's my gender bias that I would ask beautiful women leaders to stand up, but also 51% of the African population is made up of women. $50 trillion of money in circulation through consumer spending in the world is derived from monies that women spend. There is no economic model, no business case that can be made for Africa or the world if we discount women. So I'm really hoping that you give our girls the platform and the voice that they deserve during the next 2 days. And congratulations to you ladies for being here. Without further ado, it's an anniversary year, it's an opportunity to celebrate, so may I introduce to you the President of the Africa CEO Forum, Mr. Amir Ben Yamid, the founder and proprietor of this organization.
I would like first to thank you, Lerato. You know why I'm fighting every year to have you among us. And I know that one day you'll make a perfect president of the Africa CEO Forum. And it will be a woman, so it will be great. Monsieur le Président de la République du Ghana, Messieurs les Premiers ministres, Mesdames et Messieurs les ministres, chers amis, au nom du groupe Jeune Afrique, de Rainbow et de la Banque africaine de développement, j'ai le grand plaisir de vous accueillir parmi nous ici à Genève pour cette nouvelle édition du Africa CEO Forum. Alors, celles et ceux qui ont déjà participé aux précédentes éditions auront constaté que nous avons procédé à quelques changements à l'hôtel cette année, puisque au-dessus de ce qui est d'habitude une piscine, nous avons dû construire ce chapiteau pour vous accueillir tous parce que vous êtes de plus en plus nombreux et que l'hôtel, dans sa capacité normale, ne suffit plus. Alors, cette édition 2017 accueille un peu plus de 1150 participants. Et comme certains ont dû s'en étonner en arrivant, nous avons ces 3 arbres. Ces 3 arbres que nous avons choisi de préserver en raison de leur grand âge et qui seront donc nos invités très spéciaux durant ces 2 jours parce que tout le monde nous en a fait le commentaire en arrivant. Alors, nous avons rarement l'habitude de nous mettre en avant, mais je voudrais faire une exception cette année car c'est, comme Lerato l'a dit, c'est la 5e édition du Africa CEO Forum, c'est donc un anniversaire important et je crois que ce que nous avons construit ensemble est unique et mérite qu'on s'y attarde. Nous avons construit ensemble une organisation qui réunit désormais, chaque année, près de 1000 décideurs économiques de premier plan. Une organisation véritablement continentale, avec une augmentation du nombre de pays représentés, 42 pour cette édition. Une organisation que vous appréciez pour la qualité de son networking et ses opportunités d'affaires. Une organisation qui est devenue, comme nous nous y étions engagés l'année dernière, une véritable plateforme d'investissement entre décideurs publics, opérateurs et acteurs du monde de la finance. Et enfin, une organisation au sein de laquelle, un autre engagement que nous avions pris l'année dernière, les femmes dirigeantes et les jeunes sont de plus en plus présents et actifs. Alors tout cela s'est fait grâce au soutien de la Banque africaine de développement, grâce à la fidélité de plus d'une centaine d'entreprises partenaires et grâce à votre implication à tous. Grâce à vous, le forum s'est constamment amélioré et est devenu aujourd'hui le plus important rendez-vous annuel du secteur privé. Nous avons donc atteint beaucoup de nos objectifs initiaux, mais le plus important, c'est de continuer à progresser chaque année. Et c'est ce qui m'amène à vous parler du programme de cette édition que nous avons choisi d'intituler « Rethinking Africa's Business Model ». Alors pour expliquer notre choix, je voudrais faire appel à Warren Buffett, qui est l'un des financiers les plus réputés de la planète, inutile de le présenter. Il est célèbre pour ses investissements, mais aussi pour ses bons mots. Particulièrement celui-ci, originellement pensé pour décrire les investisseurs imprudents. C'est quand la mer se retire que l'on voit ceux qui se baignent sans maillot. Alors j'ai choisi cette illustration car elle montre bien la situation actuelle de certaines de nos économies qui, après une décennie de forte croissance, sont fragilisées. Si un peu moins d'une dizaine d'économies africaines ont continué à bien performer, avec un taux de croissance supérieur à 6%, la croissance moyenne africaine est passée de 5,3% entre 2010 et 2014 à 3,4% en 2015. Elle est même tombée à 1,4% l'année dernière en Afrique subsaharienne. Plus inquiétant encore, les 2 plus grandes économies du continent, le Nigeria et l'Afrique du Sud, qui produisent à elles seules 34% de la production du continent, sont notoirement sinistrées. Et les nouvelles de grands pays à forte population, comme l'Égypte ou la RDC, ne sont pas beaucoup plus réjouissantes. Alors cette préoccupation quant à la situation économique, nous l'avons réfléchi, nous l'avons essayé de vous associer à ce sentiment et nous avons créé un sondage exclusif que nous avons élaboré pour ce forum et nous donnerons bientôt les détails dans les publications du groupe Jeune Afrique. Basé sur un panel représentatif d'1 million de CEO répartis sur tout le continent, ce baromètre de confiance des dirigeants d'entreprise livre plusieurs éclairages intéressants. Vous êtes tout d'abord 62% à considérer qu'au cours des derniers mois, l'activité économique de votre entreprise a été impactée. Interrogé sur le bilan à retenir de ces 15 années de croissance, vous êtes plus de 82% à considérer que si de nombreux progrès ont été faits, beaucoup reste à faire. À telle enseigne que vos deux principales revendications auprès du gouvernement, des gouvernements, sont plus que jamais l'amélioration du climat des affaires et la lutte contre la fraude et la corruption. De même, loin devant tous les autres sujets, vous considérez que les principaux facteurs clés de succès pour le retour de la croissance sont toujours la diversification économique et l'intégration régionale. Alors, entre les afro-optimistes qui voient une Afrique sur le point de décoller, les afro-sceptiques qui voient une Afrique en train de stagner, voire de régresser, nous avons choisi tout simplement d'opter pour l'afro-réalisme, en reconnaissant que, quelle que soit la réalité de la situation, et pour peu que nous mettions les ressources et l'énergie nécessaires, l'avenir nous appartient. C'est d'ailleurs le sentiment d'une majorité d'entre vous, puisque vous êtes plus de 71% à être optimistes sur les futures performances économiques de vos marchés. Vous êtes également plus de 92% à être confiants dans les propres perspectives de votre entreprise. Et c'est pour toutes ces raisons, comme vous avez pu le constater à la lecture du programme, que nous avons choisi de porter le débat sur les évolutions qui s'imposent pour réunir ce nouveau cycle économique. Dans le même ordre d'idées, je voudrais partager une dernière réflexion avec vous avant de donner la parole à Pierre Ghislain, le vice-président de la Banque africaine de développement. Lerato a parlé tout à l'heure de la montée du populisme. C'est un sujet qu'il ne faut pas écarter. En novembre 2016, Donald Trump a été élu président des États-Unis. Quelques mois plus tôt, c'était la Grande-Bretagne qui votait la sortie de l'Union européenne. Cela faisait suite à l'émergence du parti Syriza en Grèce, au mouvement 5 étoiles en Italie, à Podemos en Espagne, et dans quelques semaines, probablement, le Front national de Marine Le Pen, qui devrait arriver en tête du premier tour de l'élection présidentielle en France. Ces mouvements nationalistes, extrémistes, qu'ils soient de gauche ou de droite, ont tous un point commun. Ils se nourrissent du rejet par les citoyens de l'establishment politique, mais aussi des entreprises qui, le plus souvent, sont accusées de ne pas partager les fruits de la croissance. Et le risque est grand que, tôt ou tard, l'Afrique soit contaminée. Tout simplement parce que ce petit appareil a accéléré la courbe d'apprentissage africaine. Il permet bien sûr à l'Afrique d'espérer brûler les étapes dans le domaine de la communication, des services, mais ce leapfrog, comme on l'appelle, ne se limitera certainement pas à l'économie. Il touchera vraisemblablement la politique, facilitée par la surinformation, la désinformation, comme l'a bien souligné Lerato, et les réseaux sociaux. Alors, dans des capitales où les déchets ménagers ne sont souvent pas encore pas ramassés, où nos universités publiques n'ont pas les moyens de produire nos futures élites, où l'énergie et les transports restent souvent embryonnaires, où l'on privilégie les centres commerciaux à la création d'espaces verts, dans nos pays où la culture ne fait plus partie des attributs de la réussite des étudiants, alors que nous célébrons dans le même temps l'argent, qui est devenu le principal symbole de la réussite. Comment imaginer que cette situation puisse perdurer sans risque pour la stabilité politique, pour la prospérité économique et sociale de tous? Dans ce contexte, pouvons-nous réfléchir à un modèle d'entreprise africaine différent? Pouvons-nous nous distinguer du reste du monde en renforçant au sein de nos entreprises notre ADN africain, basé sur la solidarité et le partage? Comment mettre l'entreprise au cœur de nos citoyens, l'entreprise citoyenne, au cœur de nos stratégies, au même titre que le marketing, que la production ou la gestion? Quelles seraient les mesures qui permettraient de respecter le profit tout en améliorant la situation économique et sociale des populations avec lesquelles nous travaillons? En fait, est-il possible de faire émerger un modèle de développement de nos entreprises purement africain? Alors, au-delà de la plateforme d'affaires que nous faisons prospérer ensemble et dont j'ai souligné les acquis depuis 5 ans, il me semble que réfléchir à cette évolution nous semble être le rôle du Africa CEO Forum et de tous ses membres. Et j'espère sincèrement aussi que les deux communautés dont Lerato a souligné la présence, les jeunes entrepreneurs et encore plus particulièrement celle des femmes, seront plus que tout sensibles à cet objectif. Voilà, j'ai déjà pris beaucoup de votre temps. Je vous remercie encore à tous pour votre présence. Je remercie toutes les équipes qui ont préparé cette 5e édition et je vous souhaite un excellent Africa CEO Forum 2017. Merci à tous.
All right, thanks so much to you, Amir. I think that's important. We need to prosper together. There's a Swahili proverb that says, if you want to go far, go alone. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. I just messed that up, but I think you need to give me an applause for it all the same. But I think that's an important concept, is that no man is an island, and there's no Africa that can prosper without the rest of the world, and vice versa. And I think one organization that really walks the talk is the African Development Bank. Over the years that I've been doing a lot of conferences with the African Development Bank, I've seen them set up an Africa Fund sponsoring the private sector. I've seen them supporting now young entrepreneurs. I've seen them working hand in hand with governments on infrastructure development and even doubling the financing in so many of these instances. This is Africa's premier development finance institution. But more than that, they have become champions of a new Africa. Unfortunately, today, the president of the African Development Bank cannot be with us because he has suffered a personal tragedy. And I think over the next 2 days, we should just please hold Dr. Adesina in our thoughts. But representing the organization is the vice president in charge of the private sector. Please welcome warmly Pierre Gislan.
Merci Lerato, merci Amir. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here this morning. Good morning to you all and welcome to the Africa CEO Forum 2017. The African Development Bank is proud to be a strategic partner of the Africa CEO Forum. President Adesina was looking forward very much to being here with you today. But as Lerato just indicated, unfortunately, due to a personal family loss, he is unable to join us, but asked me to assure you that he is with you because, and I quote him, Africa is always on my mind. There's no doubt that the future belongs to Africa. Just think about it. By 2050, Africa will have the same population as China and India today, with rising consumer demand from a growing middle class. The cities will be booming, and the number of urban areas with population over 5 million will rise. By 2050, Lagos, with a current population of about 18 million, will double in size. Same applies to Kinshasa, with current population of 15 million. 3 of the 10 most populous nations globally will be African. Africa, which already counts about 230 million young people today, about 20% of the youth globally, will increasingly be the youngest continent. So Africa has a young and growing workforce, which will increase from about 617 million today to about 1.6 billion by 2060, providing an opportunity to reap a demographic dividend that will boost Africa's growth and lift millions out of poverty. If we harness these potentials and get people working productively, Africa will be unstoppable. That's the future we must shape with a sense of urgency. To do so, Africa must unleash the power of the private sector. Governments should not be nervous about the private sector. They must fully embrace it, incentivize and enable its full potential. Like a bird flies with 2 wings, so must economies. Public and private sectors must be in synchronous balance. That's why we must continue to work hard to reduce the cost of doing business. High returns don't guarantee investments, but stable and predictable returns do. Africa must put in place a conducive and predictable macroeconomic, business, property rights, and fiscal environment. And yes, democracy and freedom of speech should deepen. Governments may change, but good policies should not go out with every new government. Africa needs policy consistency, predictability and stability of its business environment. It's encouraging that Africa accounted for over 30% of the business and regulatory reforms globally in 2015. But FDI flows haven't really followed this trend. Excluding Caribbean financial centers, FDI to developing economies in 2015 increased by 9% to 665 billion. but Africa accounts for only 7% of total FDI in developing countries. Much needs to be done to massively attract FDI to Africa. We must address the huge infrastructure deficits facing Africa. At the top of the list is electricity. Some 645 million people do not have electricity. Over 95% of mobile telephone tower sites in off-grid regions run on inefficient diesel generators, accounting for up to 60% of their operating costs. Introducing cleaner off-grid solutions will provide business opportunities to private investors. Political will is what drove a country like Vietnam to achieve universal access to electricity in 10 years. Since the launch by the bank of the New Deal on Energy for Africa, we are beginning to see such a trend emerging in Africa. Political will is the currency of development. Political will is what is driving Côte d'Ivoire to accelerate universal access to electricity by 2019. Political will is what is pushing Ethiopia to develop 6,000 megawatt with its Renaissance Dam, which on completion will be the largest dam in Africa and the 7th largest in the world. We can see that political will in Morocco, where the bank supported the country to develop the world's largest concentrated solar system. And in Kenya, where this year, with the support of the bank and partners, the largest wind farm in Africa will be launched. Uganda, Rwanda, Senegal, Mozambique, Zambia, Nigeria, and South Africa are today making renewed efforts towards boosting electricity. And electricity, or rather the lack thereof, has played a key role in some recent elections. As President Adesina said, to stay in power, African leaders must provide power. But we must move faster. Just imagine an Africa with lights everywhere. Business will boom. Factories will churn out products. Africa's cost of doing business will drop, and it will be competitive. It will spark innovation. Jobs will be everywhere, especially for the young. An electrified Africa will be an unstoppable Africa. Then Africa will be truly free to join the League of Industrialized Nations. We must shape a better future for Africa's youth. Thousands fleeing on rickety boats on perilous journeys to Europe is not the solution. We must give them hope in Africa. Priority must be on building skills, nurturing entrepreneurship, and providing venture capital, equity and affordable credit facilities, specifically targeted to young entrepreneurs. We need to prepare for the jobs of tomorrow instead of training for the jobs of yesterday. The digital economy is the future. Investments in artificial intelligence, robotics, nanotechnology, material sciences, biotechnology, and computer engineering will define the future economies. That's why the bank has launched a major jobs initiative to help countries develop 25 million jobs for the youth in the next 10 years. We focus on ramping up digital and computer programming skills needed for the digital economy. We must also accelerate regional trade. For this, we need investments in critical regional infrastructure, especially roads, rail, and aviation. With the Algiers-Lagos highway due for completion, renewed drive for the construction of the Lagos-Abidjan highway and the Northern Corridor in East Africa, the future looks bright. But for these investments to generate truly deep impact, we also need effective integration of markets, competition in services such as trucking, and fluid border crossings. The conclusion of the Continental Free Trade Area will boost growth, trade, and investment in Africa. Investments in digital infrastructure will help unleash greater financial inclusion, new businesses, and a services revolution. Feeding Africa is top priority. This is especially important as some African countries are witnessing drought-related food insecurity. Now more than ever is the time for accelerating investments in agriculture. The bank is increasing its support to agriculture by 400% for a total of $24 billion over the next 10 years. Our focus is making agriculture a business. Our goal is to help achieve food security within 10 years, but also to help Africa unlock $31 billion per year from agriculture investments. That will come through agro-allied industrialization. You all here, as CEOs, have huge roles to play, from technologies, power, infrastructure, logistics, finance, industry, services, and other sectors. But we must also face up to emerging challenges. As we speak, there's a huge problem of drought that could result in widespread famine unfolding in some African countries. Global climate change is having negative effects like never before seen anywhere in the world. Lake Chad has literally disappeared, and with it, livelihoods of millions of people. Millions are at risk of food insecurity in northern Kenya, Somalia, South Sudan, and northern Nigeria. We must immediately mobilize donations to save millions of children at risk of starvation and prevent the decimation of livelihoods. This is the time for bold actions. We ask all African businesses and all investors in Africa to join the bank on this drive to save millions of lives. Let us all unite to shape Africa's future, but let's also save the lives of millions today so they might see that bright future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pierre Ghislain. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to begin our debate, and the topic is reinventing the African business model. Talking us through this topic, I'd like to invite Mr. Mo Ibrahim, founder of the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, to join us. I'd like to call on Mr. Naguib Sawiris, the CEO of Orascom. I'd like to call on Madam Saran Kebet Coulibaly, the Vice President of the IFC. I'd like to recall Mr. Pierre Ghislain, the Vice President in charge of the private sector at the African Development Bank. And then I'd also like to call on our expert panelist, who is the Africa Director at the IMF, Mr. Abebe Amro Selassie. If you could all join me on stage, please.
How do you do? Nice to meet you.
Hi, how are you? Nice to meet you.
Hello again.
Okay.
You all see your seats? Over here. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
Nice to
You're
meet
sitting next to me. Okay. Everybody okay? All right, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to be discussing the topic at hand, reinventing the African economic model. And to lead that discussion is going to be Mr. Selassie, who's just going to talk us through some research and some theories. But to give you, are you right there? Just to give you an understanding of what it is we're talking about, and also to our guests, I'd like this conversation to be personal, reflective of the experiences you've had in running companies and big businesses. I'd like us to be less technical. I'd like us to simplify the text, and I'd like us to bring it down to the people. Because at the end of the day, a new economic model for Africa is about the people. I've heard many experts and many researchers, you're shaking your head, it is about the people. I've heard many experts say it is time to introduce something new. It is time to do things differently. Some have said it is time to overhaul the African economic model. We have to move beyond extractive industries trading commodities. In fact, we have to rise above this idea of industrialization and manufacturing. We have to move into the digital. We have to recognize that there are disruptors in the economy. We have to recognize the innovation of the youth and of women. And we have to harness all those talents to create a completely new perspective on Africa. Can you lead us in that conversation, please?
Thank you, Lorato. Very good morning to you all. That's a big ask, I have to say. But I'll try and do what I can to give you a perspective from the International Monetary Fund. I want to make two very general points to start with, and then have a very short presentation. I think a lot of negative ideas, thoughts are circulating in the region about the particularly difficult economic time at this juncture. But I just want to say that, as the presenters before me noted, I am of the camp that believes that Africa's potential is immense over the next 20, 30 years. And for that, I think we only have to look back about the progress that has been made in the region over the last 25 odd years. Anybody who had traveled to the region in the early 90s and does so again now will have noticed the tremendous transformation. And this is not limited to the capital cities, but really much deep into the countryside in the region. I think that's the first point. Second, the focus of my presentation will be largely on the macroeconomic health of the region and the issues related to that. Part of this has to do with my mandate, the institution's mandate, but partly also I think it's fundamental to how the region will do over the coming years. So, consistent with my introductory points, I think I want to talk about the challenge that we're facing at the moment, which is generally of the macro nature, economic nature, and then I'll talk a little bit about what and why we should be optimistic and what it will take, I think, to unleash the potential. I think the first point, of course, is that economic growth in sub-Saharan Africa, but also broader Africa, has decelerated quite sharply over the last couple of years. This chart basically shows the economic growth for the whole of Africa, which has decelerated to below 2.5% and much lower still, around 1.4, 1.5 for sub-Saharan Africa. What's a little bit disappointing about this is it's very much reminiscent of previous slowdowns in the region. We've had, at least since 1970, 4 sharp contractions in economic growth, generally related to declines in commodity cycles. And of course, what we're seeing now is very much reminiscent of that. So, there's a sense that, once again, Africa is being impacted by the decline in commodity prices, and with it is unfolding maybe unfolding lower growth. But I think it's also important to note that there is a tremendous diversity of outcomes. Even though the regional aggregate number has been declining, there's quite a bit of variation in growth outcomes across the region. And this, I think, touches on something Lorato said. So, the sense our very strong perspective at the IMF is that the recent slowdown in economic activity in sub-Saharan Africa is not just about, it has affected commodity prices most, but there are quite a few other countries that continue to grow rapidly. And the growth boom that we've had over the last 15 odd years has not just been about commodity prices. For every country like Nigeria or Angola that benefited from high commodity prices, there have been many others which were impacted adversely by high commodity prices. So if you're Kenya, you're importing a lot of oil at very high prices. That was detrimental to your terms of trade. And this, I think, comes out a little bit more when you see that even now, in the context of this slowdown, there's quite a lot of countries that continue to grow rapidly. The median growth rate in Africa is 3.7. There's quite a few countries, the likes of Tanzania, Ethiopia, Cote d'Ivoire, that continue to grow at 6% or more. But of course, by the same token, the countries that are heavily reliant on commodity prices, the Angolas, South Africas of this world, are in recession and feeling the pinch of lower commodity prices. So an important takeaway, again, is that while there are some countries where the growth story has been about commodities, by no means has that been the case for the whole region. Of course, with lower economic growth, with lower revenues from oil and the like, macroeconomic imbalances have been impacted. This chart basically shows the trend, the tendency for the fiscal deficit to have widened in recent years for the oil, resource-intensive countries. So that these are the countries that are heavily commodity reliant. So fiscal deficits have widened significantly. What is, however, a little bit disconcerting to us is that it's not just in these countries that have been impacted most by the slowdown in, by the lower commodity prices, but also in countries that continue to grow rapidly, that we've seen deficits widening. So this is a challenge. Why? Because generally when growth is high, when countries are growing rapidly, you expect deficits to moderate. That has not been happening, and accompanying this widening of deficits, of course, has been an increase in debt. It's still, in most cases, debt remains at a manageable level. I'm talking about public debt, of course, but it is beginning to rise, and in some countries, it has become a constraint on economic activity and growth. So this, in brief, is a snapshot of the macro health of the region. I'm trying to keep my presentation as brief as possible. And in terms of beginning to look forward, this year we expect economic growth for the continent to recover somewhat to around 3%, and it should continue to accelerate in 2018 and beyond. Much, however, depends on the actions that are going to be taken in the next couple of years, and I want to flag that it's far from clear that it's far from clear that conditions will be as conducive as they have been in recent years. This chart basically shows the cost of financing, the yields that African countries have been facing more recently since 2014, and as you can see by the red line, in general, financing conditions facing the region has been much tighter. Cost of financing has been higher than, for example, comparable countries in much of the rest of the world. And the green bar shows basically frontier markets, the likes of Vietnam, and the cost of financing they've been facing. Those have been broadly stable over the last 3-4 years. In sub-Saharan Africa, we've seen 1.5–2 percentage points increase in the cost of financing. Again, showing that the external environment remains more difficult than it has been in recent years. One of the things that's, as many others, and was touched on earlier, I find incredibly both uplifting and a cause for tremendous, a sign of the tremendous potential the region has, is that, we often like to talk about what's going to play out over the next 5 years or over the next 30–40 years. But I think it's quite often very useful to look at a more, a somewhat truncated medium-term perspective. Here I've picked 2030, and one of the numbers that has struck me, as colleagues of mine and I've been working on some numbers, has been that by 2030, half of the annual increase in the global working age population will be coming from sub-Saharan Africa. This is a number of huge global significance. So, if we fast forward to 2030, basically for every, population growth will be of the order of, working age population will grow of the order of 200 million. Half of it, more than half of it actually, will be coming from sub-Saharan Africa. Here, the red bar shows basically the trajectory of Africa's contribution to global working age population, and the green bar is the rest of the world. So the inflection point will happen around 2030, and this is something that is certain to happen. I mean, these kids have been born today or are about to be born, and so this outcome, unlike many other economic projections, is something that has much more concreteness about it. What this tells me is twofold. For me, the takeaways are twofold. One is that if any company in the world that is hoping to be of a global scale has to have a way of tapping into this resource. At the end of the day, be it economic activity or at the company level or global level, comes out of two factors. I think one is, of course, labor input, and the other is how productive that input is, when it's supplemented by capital and technology. And the labor input for the whole global economy is going to be increasingly only available in sub-Saharan Africa and much of the rest of Africa. So this is something which is of huge, huge potential about, for the region that has to be motivating both, policymakers like us, but also global companies. How, per capita income evolves in individual countries over the period in which they're going to be enjoying this demographic transition, however, is far from cast, and much will depend on what countries do to tap into this potential. This chart we're using to show, the demographic transition that we're talking about unfolded at about the same time in the 1970s and 80s in Asia and Latin America about the same time. But how per capita income evolved in Asia versus Latin America, of course, is something we all know about. And I show this a little bit. The green bar shows how the trajectory of per capita income in Korea, which just in the first 20 years of when it was enjoying this dividend, per capita income had increased by 25, 30 percentage points. Whereas in Latin America, it has been restrained, much more restrained. And in our view, this has had to do with a lot with the economic volatility, the growth volatility that Latin America experienced because to a large extent of macroeconomic difficulties that the region faced. There is this expression that to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Huh? So from the from the IMF perspective, our concern is macroeconomic, and I want to highlight a little bit to answer your question. 3 things that have to be done at the macroeconomic level in terms of getting the playing field appropriate for companies to take off from. I think the first one, again, is, as I noted, macroeconomic imbalances have been widening of late, part of it feeding of the slowdown in growth, but part also because policies have been a bit too adventurous. I think it's going to be very, very important to try and regain, control of these imbalances. I think that's first order of business. Second, I think, is enhancing state capacity. There are many dimensions to state capacity, but of course a very important one is being able to have the resources to pay for a lot of the investments that the region need, be it electricity investment in health, education, agriculture. That has to increasingly come from government resources. So revenue mobilization is going to be key. The third one, I would say, is kind of the litmus test as to whether we are on a trajectory that is going to allow us have our countries emulate the Asian countries or otherwise. Increasingly, the litmus test has to be how much exports are growing, but increasingly how much exports are diversifying. I think, for policymakers, if export diversification is not taking place, that is the time to stop and say what is wrong with my business model, and to revisit that business model. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you. If I can ask you to join the panel over there. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've gotten a macroeconomic overview. It was quite technical. I'm going to ask us not to do that. My first question to all of you, and if I may ask you to answer succinctly, in a sentence, we'll start this way. Mo Ibrahim, what to you represents a new African economic model?
I really find hard to answer in one sentence because I disagree with the question, I disagree with the presentation. This is not about a business plan. Africa is not a company. Africa is 54 countries. Running a country is separate completely from running a company. So I cannot answer you in this instance. But what is needed to be done is a big elephant in the room. It is good governance. That's the thing we need to talk about.
And we're going to talk about it. Mr. Sawiris, is there a new economic model that we should be pursuing?
I think we have enough economic models. It's not about the model, it's about the intention. Like my friend said, that what do we want as businessmen? We want an Africa that is democratic. So the country must be democratically run. The because if it's not democratically run, we are in danger as much as the people of the country. We want countries with no corruption, because corruption is not good for our business, because we can be extorted, we can be sent out if we don't yield to corruption. And we want an Africa that is transparent. So I voice my vote to my friend here. What we all look for is governance, open markets, transparency, laws that encourage investments, not populism and trying to persuade people that we're doing the best for them by depriving them from investments that come from people like us.
Do you concur, Saran? We don't need a new economic model, we just need better governance.
Yes, very much so. I think that's a fundamental point. But since the two previous speakers have talked about that particular point, I won't re-emphasize. But I think Africa has to rely on higher productivity. That is a fundamental basis for it to really progress and do much better. And it can do that by relying on technologies that are low cost, that can bring the cost of servicing a wider population many folds. And I think we'll have the opportunity to be discussing that to a large extent.
Gislan, reinventing a new business model, economic model?
I think you have a panel that is pretty aligned here. So I would say new economic governance model for sure, one that would be much more decentralized, one that will rely, amongst other, on the power of technology and disruptive technology to enable the youth, the women, but all economic actors, the private sector, to play a much more central role. So less central planning, more private initiative.
What do you make of the fact that many people in this room have said that Africa does need a new economic model? We cannot keep on being producers of commodities and trading with China or Europe. We cannot continue to be at the very bottom of the manufacturing value add scale. We cannot continue trying to do business in environments where there's low energy. Actually, Africa does need a new way of running its economies.
Madam, you keep insisting on a new economic. I don't know what did you teach you that in a business school or what?
That's the topic of the discussion.
Actually, it is wrong phrasing. People need to understand economic policy is an outcome. Is an outcome of the governance model of the country.
Right.
Governance stands on 4 pillars.
Yeah.
That's what Africa needs. The first pillar is the rule of law. We need the rule of law. Rule of law is not just a good constitution, which president don't tinker with it every time, and clean, independent judiciary, safety of people. That's one. Without rule of law, no investment, no civilized society. Second one is a sustainable economic development. Here comes issues of infrastructure, energy, public finance, etc., etc. That come under that. Third pillar is human development, health and education, the quality of and relevance of it. Our education system doesn't match our business needs. That's why we generate a lot of school children with certificates or university graduates who are not fit for any job because they have not been taught anything relates to the market. The fourth pillar is the participation, democracy, human rights, social, economic, gender issues. These are the pillars of governance. And we produce this is not like news. We produce an index, we measure all of this, 100 parameters every year. Just look at that. Anybody scoring less than 50 is a failed government. Anybody above 50 is moving forward. An outcome of this comes different executions and different policies. So please don't say, oh, I need a new business model for Africa. What business model? There's nothing called business model for a country. So let us use the right terminology. Right. Otherwise, the discussion goes astray. I'm sorry, but we need to be honest.
Don't be sorry. You're being frank, and that's why we like you here.
Okay. But I think also those fundamentals, conditions that he's describing would certainly lead to an Africa that transforms more of its production and shifting away from reliance, over-reliance on commodities.
You know, because Dr. Ibrahim is sitting so close to me, I don't want to antagonize him, so I want to do this one thing. I want to run a snap poll. By a show of hands, how many of you think that even the framing of this question is wrong? Reinventing a business model for Africa. That's not even the conversation we should be having.
You have a few hands up.
I'm sorry to say, that's just 1/4 of the room. How many of you
That's
do
not 1/4,
believe?
that's three
how
quarters
many-
of the room. Come on.
Okay, let's do
I
the poll
take
with
a-
the lights on. Okay,
I-
with the lights on, with the lights on. Let's do that again. How many of you think we're having the wrong conversation?
That's all the room.
That's all the room. I
That's
can.
2/3 of the room.
I take a picture. I'll take a photograph.
Take the picture. How many of you
She
believe?
talked about facts,
No
not
alternative,
alternative facts. Yes.
How many of you believe that Africa needs an overhaul?
Of course, you need an overhaul.
Not just of the
You're cheating
institutions,
now.
just an
That's not the
overhaul.
question.
All right. So on the basis of the consensus in the room, the topic changes a little bit. You wanted to say something, Pierre Gaslan, before I move us in a new direction.
No, I agree with the general sense. My sense is that lots of things that governments need to do differently. And let me take an example. We've talked about infrastructure, we've talked about regional infrastructure, we talked about free trade areas. What we need to start doing is having government get less involved in trying to regulate the economy and more involved in breaking down barriers, more involved in creating markets that are large enough for investors to invest in without being constrained by what is by and large in most of Africa a relatively small domestic market. So we need governments to work with one another, unshackle these barriers, open up markets, create these opportunities. The opportunities are here, but are being artificially constrained. So I think there is a new model, a new way of doing business, and I think it requires a different type of government intervention, less about regulating domestic market, more about creating opportunities, including regional opportunities for investors in their economies.
I just wanted to, on this, one of the things that's a bit depressing when I engage in conversations is that Africa continues to be seen through a commodity prism, and that's not true. Out of the 54 countries in the region, at most 18, 19 rely to a significant degree on commodity prices, on commodities. Much the rest doesn't. If you're Malawi, Tunisia, I mean, you don't rely significantly on. So I think that's very important. Okay, that's one. Second point is, if you're Nigeria, Nigeria cannot stop becoming oil reliant overnight. It's not as if they're going to leave the oil down there, right, on the ground. So the point really is more about making sure that the rest of your economy doesn't suffer and that you move the resources towards helping diversify the rest. So I think this whole idea that the problem is with the business model, I think, is not the right focus.
All right, let's elaborate on what's been said here, that what Africa needs is better governance. Let's start with that one fundamental issue. Why do we persist or continually have this problem of governance? Is it the political leaders? Is it the failure of civic engagement? We don't hold our leaders accountable. We don't respect our constitutions. What do you see as the problem?
Yeah, I think it's a number of issues really. We have to let's look at the recent history of Africa. We had slavery, not far away actually. Then we had colonialism. Then we have the hurried move towards independence. Governments was after the withdrawal of British and France, and there was this wave of this happened without putting in place really the institutions. Governance at the end is about institutions. And so the question is just to get a black face and get a piece of cloth as colored flag, raise it up, and people write a piece of music to drama. This is not independence. Okay. Independence is about really building the institutions, the political parties, the courts, the parliaments, etc., and setting the transition of democracy and national power. Then, what happened to Africa was even worse than colonization, with something called the Cold War. You are not old enough to remember that. But some of us here...
I
will
know
not-
the USSR
okay,
and America
Okay, you are
and
cultured.
constructive engagement.
So we had the Cold War. And the Cold War, in my view, was much worse for Africa than even colonialism. Because in the Cold War, we ended up with two superpowers. Those guys interested in having clients, okay? And it doesn't matter. Murderers, criminals, dictators, bastards. They call them bastards. He's my bastard, this is your bastard. And because it is a chess game, chess board, we need to control that. So we ended up with all those guys, you know, we had, Bokassa here, we had Idi Amin there, we had Mobutu there. In Ethiopia, you had these criminal gangs over there. We had everywhere. Suddenly Africa is run by a group of criminals, bloodthirsty, and supported, armed, financed by the client. You know, that was an improvement in Africa. It started to happen after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Watch it. Brought the economic development in Africa, the democratic development in Africa. You say nothing started to happen until the fall of Berlin Wall in 1989, 1990. Then Africa started to move forward.
Let me ask you a question, and please, a brief answer. So here we are in 2017, and we're still struggling with having institutions that work well, laws that are upheld. We acknowledge that point withstanding. But you have an interesting phenomenon. You've got these so-called millennials, and they're on social media.
Yeah.
They're in the digital economy. They are holding leaders' feet to the fire. They want answers today, and if you don't give them an answer, they take to the streets.
Yeah.
That's civic activism. That's a new way of engagement, all because of technology. Do you not think that's a positive sign for Africa?
Absolutely. That would give us hope, this young generation, which is better connected, the civil society. But you also notice, we see now more and more African governments are closing the space for civil society. Many African governments now are passing laws to prevent foreign funding from civil society. And they call them, if you receive funding from a foreign source, then you are an agent, a foreign agent. The same presidents who run around Europe and United States begging for money, they're happy to take the foreign money, and they don't call themselves agents. But if the society receive, let's be consistent.
Yeah. Let's move the conversation along, Mr. Sawiris. Even if we've decided let's not reinvent the business model, but let's improve on what we have. You see the disruptions happening around you, from green technologies to mobile banking to young innovation. What do you think are going to be the game changers, and in which industries?
I think, I have a different philosophy. I mean, I don't think Africa is different from anywhere in the world. So trying to portray Africa as it's like a certain specific case, it's not. Again, it's all about, I'm sorry, it's like we keep on repeating it's about governance. I'll explain something to you. Most of the entrepreneurs here have suffered from the lack of governance. We have been in countries where we've been extorted, the companies we created and the investments we did were taken by governments for maybe various reasons. Is it political or is it corruption? Because we refused to yield to corruption, so they took the companies away from us. And therefore, today, if you ask any of us, where would you invest in Africa? The first thing we say, we will invest in a country where the president is not corrupt, his team is not corrupt, he has graduates from high powered universities coming back to their countries and becoming ministers to serve their countries. I can give you examples of this. So Ivory Coast, Rwanda, Mozambique, so there are good examples in Africa where this is happening. So first, transparency and no corruption. Secondly, they need to prepare the country by having the rule of law and order. So we need laws that are clear, not to be interpreted one time like this and one time like that. Then we need courts that are efficient. So if we have a dispute, it can be gathered, you know. So it's all the same formula anywhere. I mean, I can give you examples in Europe where one would not invest, you know, because again, it's not the legal system is very slow, the tax situation is not clear, and so all what an investor wants is tranquility. He needs to feel peace, and he's protected. He wants transparency, and he wants laws that will protect him.
With all due respect, we know this. We've heard this. For 5 years, I've sat in this plenary, and we've had exactly that conversation.
There's a change now. There's a
so
change.
why are we not doing something about it?
No, that's not true. Africa is actually improving. We have less corruption now. I can list many countries today where the presidents are not Al Capones, you know. So, so it's increased. I would actually claim that in the last 5 years, the number of countries that are not managed by Grand Al Capone, as I said, have tripled or quadrupled. So when we come as investors, we say, okay, this is a clean country, this is a clean, that's where I'm going now. You see? So it's not true. Africa is improving, and also because of what you mentioned now. The social media has become a threat.
More than half of the people living in Africa will be people under the age of 30. You know what they say they want? They're tired of seeing men who are 72 years old ruling them. That's what they need to be new. When are we going to get there? How can we get there if institutions such as the African Union don't even hold their peers accountable? Where does that change need to begin?
Well, it will begin in 2050. Because once 2/3 of the population are these people, they're not going to accept these old-timers to stay, you know. So, I mean, we've seen that now. I mean, when you look what we call the Arab Spring, although many people call it a disaster, but there was one positive impact in it, and that is young people went to the streets to tell an old-timer, enough is enough, you know, we want democracy, we want freedom. We failed, it didn't happen. We lost economically, but this is a change because now leaders are aware of the power of technology, the power of social media, and the power of the young people when you go overboard and you don't accommodate their needs.
Saran, you want to comment on that? I want to take the conversation further.
No, I think I was encouraged by the fact that Mr. Sawiri acknowledged that there's been improvement. And I mean, when looking around the world, I think China is not the best example of democracy and transparency, but it has managed to lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. So, which goes to say that focusing on better policies, opening up the sectors to private investors, creating the rules of the game. Will certainly be able to attract investors. And I think we talked about earlier the reduced fiscal space in for African government. And the difficulty of borrowing money or even borrowing at the extremely high rates. This means that, I mean, there's a real opportunity for the private sector to come and invest if the conditions are right.
I'm glad you've taken us there because I want to stay on the operative word being new. Do we need new or more interesting creative funding models? And this is both to you, Saran Kebet Coulibaly and Pierre Gosselin. You know, we've seen a lot of money come through foreign direct investment, but there's a lot of money in this room that's African. There's a lot of money on the continent in circulation, from remittances to commercial banks. It needs to be harnessed. What can we do in a better way to unleash investments?
Yeah, I think for me, money is a commodity. Frankly, I think it's available if you are innovative and able to structure the right projects. Money is available. And you only need to look at the pension fund industry in the West. The insurance industry, for example, where you have massive amount of money that since the Great Recession in 2008, 2009 has been trying to find a home where it can make better returns. So there is clearly an opportunity there, and I think certainly international financial organizations like the African Development Bank, the IFC, can help basically match and connect the opportunities on the ground with the money, the hot money that's coming in. And there are different ways of looking at it, blending, for example, de-risking, because I think investors still see Africa as an extremely risky environment for good reasons in some respects, but you can mitigate those risks.
Right. Pierre Gislan, those risks withstanding, those that are still brave to tread where others fear to go, how can they structure deals and where should they be taking their money?
Thanks. Let me first rebound, if I may, on the governance question. And I'd like to focus on economic governance, because we had the same kind of discussion last week in Abidjan with Kofi Annan and Horst Kohler. And so when someone told Kofi Annan, but what about the leadership in Africa? I really liked his answer, and so I just want to relay it here. His answer was, yes, we have leadership challenges, but what is leadership? Leadership is about all of you, all of us. Leadership is what are you doing to influence the leadership to do the right thing? What are you demanding of your leaders? And I think that, to me, is quite important. And it connects also to this whole topic that has come up a few times already about the importance of these and the opportunities created by the new technologies. New technologies create opportunities to influence leadership in many different ways, in ways that cannot be circumvented and that are not necessarily the ballot box, that are probably in many cases much more powerful. But so let me get back to your question. So what we really need to do, and we all know that, is to find better models to get public and private sector to work more smoothly together. Because, and Saran already alluded to some of the opportunities and the challenges, is we have immense opportunities in Africa for investment, but we still too much doing it bit by bit, transaction by transaction, country by country. We need to streamline processes. We need to find a way where we, as kind of public sector, development finance institutions, global development players can come mostly to leverage the private sector. The key thing is to get the private money to flow more abundantly. And there are several dimensions in that. And I think your presentation and certainly your conclusion alluded to it. More than ever, after the US elections and the Brexit campaign and the general movements we see in Europe in particular, more than ever, we need to help African countries mobilize domestic resources. And that is not just tax revenue. It is also helping companies tap the local markets, develop local bond markets. Again, as I indicated earlier in another context, many of these markets are too small. We can help these countries create larger markets so that they can generate these funds from a wider pool of money. So for me, leveraging, you mentioned de-risking, I fully agree with that. Someone mentioned climate change early on. Well, Africa is the first victim of climate change, so maybe instead of kind of trying to tap into the development financing, we should tap a bit more aggressively in the climate change financing and get more funding here to help with the mitigation of that climate change requires here in Africa as a result of the weather events.
Abebe Selassie, I want to bring you into the conversation because, of course, you researched this fantastic presentation. There's still a place for policy. Whether we like it or not, the African state is still big and coordinates everything that happens. So when it comes to policy, what are the shifts? What are the new approaches we need? Because I know of many African economies where investors such as these are sitting on reserves. It's not that the money isn't there. They're simply not going to invest it until they're confident about governance. So what are the shifts that are needed at a policy level?
You know, it's very difficult to generalize, of course. I mean, we're talking about 54 countries, and each country at a particular time, you know, policy requirements are very different. What I tried to highlight there are some of the trends that we have seen of late. One is widening macroeconomic imbalances. I think, as I mentioned, part of it has to do with this big push to invest in infrastructure, to try and address the many, the significant human capital development needs countries have. That's all, of course, incredibly important to allow a lot of the progress and transformation that countries need. But one area, again, as I tried to mention earlier, where we see countries lagging is increasingly, instead of financing this through external borrowing, grants, increasingly countries are going to have to finance this through domestic revenue mobilization. And here, I think there's a lot more scope for progress. Now, of course, taxation is at the core of governance. It's part of the social contract. It's part of, people's willingness to pay. Also depends on, how they perceive the money's being used, the governance of the country. And actually seeing the money translated into goods and services. So, it has a very important domestic political dimension. But there's also a more technical dimension, and I think governments make a lot of unwise policy choices in some areas. Again, I don't want to generalize, but in some countries, there are significant fuel subsidies, for example. That's, I think, an extremely regressive way of spending limited government resources. Fuel subsidies typically accrue to the richer part of the population, so it's much better to eliminate those and provide direct transfers to the poor that are being affected. That's one thing. There's a lot of tax exemptions. I'm sure a lot of people in this room benefit from tax exemptions, but is that the best use of government resources?
Right.
These are, if you really want to have an important conversation at this forum, this is one important thing that has to be discussed. Governments need to collect a lot more taxes than they do right now.
Just two questions to our two big investors. If somebody said to you today, in fact, they probably say it to you every day, but here is an idea that just needs your support. Here's the industry of the future. Which one is that?
That's a very appropriate question. There are many things happening in Africa, to be honest. Africa is hungry for a lot of things. Huge consumer base, but while we're all gushing about technology and digital and being very cool, please, let's not forget the most important industry for Africa is agriculture. So let us not just, get too excitable about mobile phones and social. I'm a mobile phone guy, okay? But let's not go just too excited. That is the something, because whatever people do, at the end, everybody, whether American, Australian, or French, or whatever, has to eat. Everybody needs to eat. The resources are dwindling. People are growing. The vast resources, really new resources for agriculture, exist only in Africa. We have the vast, arable, uncultivated land in Africa. And Africa cannot even feed itself. See how much headroom is there. We need to find a way to make agriculture sexy again. Don't think just cool is just carry your smartphone and, no, agriculture. And that's what's going to create jobs.
I'm biased because I'm currently in mining, so I have to I have to say that so you don't think my opinion is neutral. No. But what's the problem with mining is it's always portrayed as if it's these Europeans coming to Africa and stealing the resources. So as long as we get this image in populist leaderships, we will not get anywhere. It's not about what you mine, it's what you do with the outcome of these mines. So if governments are open to the mining activities with all the environmental remedies that needs to be taken care of, the question to these governments, what do you do with the revenues coming from these commodities? So we all know governments are awful investors, are awful when they come to decide which projects to do. So they end up with populist projects that have maybe the fame of media, but don't serve its people. So if governments would agree that entrepreneurs like us share part of these revenues in reinvesting part of these revenues in the country, on their own will and in their own directions and in their own areas they think is viable, then this could be a new concept that will grow the opportunity. So for example, if I'm in mining and I'm giving a royalty to the government of 10%, which is tens of millions every year, and I tell them, listen, I want to improve your education system, but in my own way. Because the minute you go and fall under the bureaucratic hat of the administrators, the results are catastrophic.
Very briefly, Saran, you're obviously a member of the World Bank Group, but you support the private sector. Huge portfolio in your hands, $50 billion or so dollars. Where's your money best spent?
Well, we really invest in areas that create inclusion for all segments of the population, and irrespective of the sector. And I'm happy to talk about agriculture, that indeed employs 70% of the population in Africa. But even there, I think there are opportunities certainly to improve cultivation techniques, to improve new seeds, introduction of new seeds, but also leverage technology to improve connection to markets for small farmers, small-scale farmers. If I think, take an example of Mali, that has a lot of mangoes. How do you get that to market? How do you create income for smallholders? So these are the things that we try to focus on. Another sector would be, I think, financial technology, basically, to be able to include more people. And I think maybe that's where I disagree a little bit, because I think there are technologies today that have decreased costs to serve certain markets, the lowest markets, by 80 to 90%, and create a huge opportunity to be able to create markets.
All right, so I don't want us to belabor this point, because otherwise we're going to be running the day's program late. So I'm going to ask by a show of hands, what one other fundamental issue needs to be that we discuss? So as investors, entrepreneurs, industrialists, who believes that the biggest issue in Africa today, the thing that needs reinvention, is political leadership? By a show of hands. Okay? Who of you believe the reinvention we need in Africa today is financial modeling, how money harnesses business development? Who of you believe that what needs reinvention today is the quality of education? Who of you believe that infrastructure is the problem and we need to move towards new green technologies? And who of you believe it's the integrity of business that needs to be discussed? Forget the political leaders. It's business leaders who need to introspect. And by a show of hands, education is a problem. We need to fix it. Who's going to fix it? Whose responsibility is it to fix it? Pia Nabebe?
So education clearly is a great challenge, and I kind of associated with the room when I saw all these hands go up. So one of the issues is we do need to reinvent a new business model. Because the traditional business model of state schools that go through a very structured curriculum may not be the only or the best way to go ahead in the 21st century. So definitely major emphasis needs to be placed on education. But I believe there also that the new technologies provide a huge opportunity to leapfrog the way we look at education, not the central planning ministry decided textbooks that you then hopefully get to a classroom where hopefully the teacher will show up, but by improving connectivity and by providing support to young people and also adult people in using these technologies, they can have access to information, to skills that would be hard to access otherwise. The second channel I'd like to emphasize is the vocational training, the learning that can happen through companies, through enterprises. And finally, and again, that connects a bit to the, I think we're going to a world where a lot more is getting disintermediated, where the traditional structures are less important than what they were before. So how do we support individuals in this more decentralized world where there are more opportunities? So a very different mindset is needed.
You know, I'm not a particular expert on education, but one thing perhaps that we have to think increasingly about as policy, for policymakers to consider is having a lot more feedback mechanisms at work, and particularly now with all the technology that we have, increasingly, being able to gauge very, as frequently as possible whether the outcomes that we're seeking are indeed playing out is going to be, I think, very important. So in education, for example, I think we often wait until kids have graduated to know that they, after 10, 15 years of studying, haven't acquired the knowledge that they need. So maybe a lot more frequent testing to see that whether the model is working or not. Some kind of feedback mechanism, I think, probably is needed if indeed that's the binding constraint.
Yeah, I really think education is very important, and it's too important to be left really to a bunch of bureaucrats in the Ministry of Education. We need to have a much wider conversation about that. I'll give you an example. We just talked about agriculture. Only 2% of the university graduates in Africa study agriculture. That's 60% of our population, 2% of the university. 27% of our university graduates study humanities. Enjoy your poetry. Let the Chinese come and build your dams. What is this? It's total disconnect between our education system and our need. One thing I always amaze me that handwriting, if you notice at schools, there's so much emphasis on good handwriting. You know why? 70 years ago, the British wanted to generate clerks to help them run the administration, so they need to write neat letters. So that handwriting became so important. Why is it important now? We need to really revise. We need a big conversation between all segments of society, because it's important for us. And that conversation is not taking place.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think there are certainly educational opportunities there that we need to build on. And I just wanted to give an example of a company that we're working with that has currently 70,000 students at the primary level. That is using a very innovative model. It's called Bridge Academy. They're a little bit mired in a bit of controversy, but it's extremely creative model whereby they standardize all of the educational material. They use tablets in school. They're able to monitor the progress of students. They're able to monitor the presence of the teachers in school, and they're generating pretty good results ultimately. So I think there are models that can help Africa really get to scale, because the massive needs in terms of education, cannot be targeted through traditional methods.
I want to say that normally in Europe they're very interested to finance products that get shipped to Africa. So, or donations are mostly to accompanied with some deliveries. So if Europe would decide, for example, that they will, instead of sending products, they will send education by subsidizing European standard schools in all of Africa, they will achieve many things like that. First, they will help Africa elevate its educational programs. They will also stop the flow of immigrants coming from Africa to their borders. Nobody has really in Europe thought actively in subsidizing education in Africa. At the highest, I owe my success in my life that I went to a German school in Egypt, in Cairo. Now, this school was not expensive. It was subsidized by the German government. So I had in my class rich and poor, and we all grew together, which was another good thing because, normally we are segregated, so you feel the differences and so on. And as a result, everybody that graduated from my school is today in Egypt in a very leading position in government or private. So what we need really from Europe is really a wake-up call, help Africa elevate its education and not just sending products to Africa.
Disagree there a little bit. I think actually there are educational models today, just like the one I indicated, that do not necessarily involve subsidies. In the case that I was describing, it's $6 per month, the equivalent. So any child actually really can have access. So we really need to build on those models.
All right, so let's appreciate that on a forum like this, we're not going to find all the solutions. And also, it's been quite a long plenary. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm not taking questions from the floor, but I'm going to do this. I would like somebody who's investing in agriculture to please put their hand up. And I'd like one of you, the lady in front, please stand up. You, please stand up. If we can get a microphone to her, please. May I ask a female entrepreneur in the room to please put your hand up. The lady in red near the second big tree, please stand up. The lady in red. Okay, red, orange, 3. Take your pick.
Every
lady's in red. Lady by the big tree in orange. May I ask a young business leader to please stand up? You stood up earlier when I said under 40. Could one of the under 40s please stand up at the back of the room? There are many industrialists here. The first one to get up. 1, 2, 3. None? There's too many ladies now. Sorry, I'm biased. I'd like a man, an industrialist, to please stand up.
Do you want some water?
There we go. I think that's a fair reflection. So, I would like you to pose a question or a challenge to the audience. It's not a question we're going to answer. Just on the basis of your own experiences, please can you pose a challenge of something we need to think about?
I mean, that's a challenge in itself. Okay, I think most of the challenge I would have asked of has been said already. I think for a good business to work, we need a better leadership. And I think everything runs around leadership. So my question will be, how governments will make it easy for businesses to run a proper way?
Thank you. Can the lady investor please pose her challenge?
Merci. Le défi que je souhaite que l'Afrique puisse relever, c'est la transformation de l'ensemble de nos matières premières sur place. Et c'est à ce titre que l'Afrique pourra parler d'autosuffisance alimentaire et partant du développement économique. Donc je suis d'accord avec l'intervention de M. Mo Ibrahim qui dit que le défi important, c'est le défi de l'agriculture. Il faut pouvoir développer l'agriculture, mais l'objectif premier, c'est de pouvoir apprendre l'Afrique à transformer toute sa matière première sur place.
Thank you. Could the young business leader please pose your challenge at the back of the room? And whilst the microphone is making its way to the back of the room, if another microphone could go to the industrialist as well. Yes, sir.
How do you believe that each one of our organizations, many of them working across Africa in remote areas, in each one of the places that we work, how can we do more for those communities, and what do we leave behind? This is very important
Legacy.
for the continuity.
Legacy issues. And finally, to our industrialist. Yes, sir. Can we get a microphone to the back of the room? Yes? Okay.
We are in the agro industry. We cultivate mainly oil palm and rubber. I invest every year in 5 African countries, 100 million in capex. With the economic slowdown that we are experiencing today, where is the foreign exchange at reasonable cost to continue my industrial investment?
Thank you. All right, so there are the questions. You're free to pick which ones you want to answer. Shall we start with the very last one? Making business affordable. You can't keep having volatile exchange rates. It's expensive. And that's a policy issue, really.
Thank you. So I'll try and address that. So, again, it's very difficult to generalize, and it depends from country to country. But, an important response when a country's been hit by a shock, like, a decline in oil prices, has to be to allow the exchange rates to reflect that reality. So allowing exchange rates to depreciate when you have a negative shock, and also when there are a lot of capital inflows, to allow them to move to reflect that, is a very important way of insulating the real economy from external shocks like that. So I think allowing greater exchange rate flexibility is part of the solution to the challenge that countries are facing. By no means is it the only one, and you need comprehensive policy, macroeconomic policy response to shocks. So that has to be supported by fiscal and monetary policy. But I would say, greater exchange rate flexibility is important. When the IMF advocates this, typically it's seen as simply on economic efficiency grounds, but really it's much more about insulating the real economy and allowing resources, scarce resources, to go to where they're needed most. Thank you.
All right. There was also a question around legacy. When you invest, how do you make sure that truly at the end of the day, there's something for posterity? Our children have to be able to look back and say, yes, they set us up properly. Any of you feel strongly about the legacies that you want to leave behind?
I don't know if I would call it legacy rather than more inclusion. So that, to really disperse the benefits of economic growth to as many people as you can, and certainly remote and rural communities would be a targeted segments of the population. And again, you have to be able to reduce the cost of servicing. You have to be able to access those segments of the population, and the only way you can really do that is by looking at different types of technologies, digital technologies that are available today, that enables you as a bank, for example, not to have a branch in a remote location, but instead using a cell phone to do that. And you were asking us to be very concrete and down to earth. I had one of my colleagues who was telling a joke about a country in the Horn of Africa that he visited recently, where basically you have no currency, fiat money left, essentially. And he had a beggar come to him and ask him for money, and he said, well, look, I don't have cash. And he said, why? Why don't you send it to me over the cell phone? Yeah. So I think these are indications that things can really change.
Mr. Sawiris?
I want to say that, okay, as entrepreneurs, let's not beat about the bush. We go to invest to make money.
Yeah.
It's not a crime. But there is a small side product here that's called job creation. We create jobs. There is nothing better for a legacy, for anyone, for us to feel even charitable than the fact that we create so many jobs for young people who are desperate for a good job, and that we pay them the right wages so they grow up to be good citizens. So I just want to remind everybody that while they accuse entrepreneurs and investors that are just here for the money, okay, which is not wrong, they are there for the money, but in fact, they are the job providers. And they create jobs in Africa, so young African people who take a boat and risk dying on the trip decide to stay in their own countries and stay with their parents and their people.
That's a fantastic answer. A question was posed to you, but I couldn't hear it properly through the translation, but it was about what you'd said about education and transformation.
His French is not so good. You need to...
his French is not so good, so he and I are just sitting here on the same side. But the gist was about really and truly what's really going to create the change that we're talking about, the kind of change you're talking about through education, in agriculture, the thing that's really going to cement the change.
Right. I just say one thing first before I answer this. Talk about business people. And I belong to an expanding, a large group of business people, internationally, from everywhere, United States, China, India, Australia, UK, Europe, etc. And we call ourselves Team B, Plan B, because we believe Plan A has failed. And what Plan B is, what to say is, what is the reason for business? Why are we doing business? And Najib is right. Number one is profit. Because if there is no profit, there is no business. We have to be realistic. But number two is people, and number three is planet. So in our bottom line, we need to account for these three dividends, these three outlets, you know, profits, planet, and we cannot destroy the planet and pretend we are building sustainable business. We cannot harm the people or harm the communities and pretend we are bending. We cannot. They all come together. So that is the new approach for business, and it's increasing, and people are accepting that. What I think is really going forward, I spend a lot of time, whether in business or in civil society. We say, look, good governance is important not only for public institution, also for private sector. Right. And we straddle that. The change is going to come, I think, from the young generation, which need to be empowered, but they have to empower themselves. I was at a conference last month with young people, and a young man stood up and asked me, actually it was at Oxford University, and said, yeah, I'm an African. Why you guys don't empower us? You know, we need to really run the country. And I just laughed because I said, if you ask me to empower you, you have failed. Because you young people are the largest constituency in Africa. You go and take it. Don't ask us to give it to you. I think that is our advice. Just go and do it.
And I think on those words, we can close the panel on stage. However, before we close the session, I'd like to get the reflections of two of our distinguished political leaders in the room. I'm going to ask for two reflections from His Excellency, the Prime Minister of Guinea, and also His Excellency, the Foreign Minister of Ethiopia. From what you've heard here today, what do you think, and what do you challenge the business leaders in the room to do over the next 2 days? Yes, sir.
Merci, madame. Je vais parler en français. Je voudrais commencer par paraphraser un homme de lettres français qui disait qu'aux hommes bien nés, on n'a pas besoin d'attendre 18 ou 21 ans pour atteindre la maturité. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, le CEO Forum Afrique est un événement majeur. Je voudrais donc féliciter le président de ce forum et toute son équipe pour le travail fantastique qui est réalisé par Monsieur Benyamin et son monde. Je voudrais saluer cette initiative qui permet de réunir un panel aussi relevé de décideurs politiques et économiques pour se retrouver et discuter des problèmes du continent dans une perspective africaine. Je suis avec beaucoup d'intérêt le débat qui vient de se faire. Et je pense qu'il est important qu'en Afrique, nous ayons un véritable débat sur ce que nous appelons la gouvernance ou la bonne gouvernance. J'ai noté tout à l'heure la dame qui disait que c'est vrai que la Chine, finalement, a sorti des millions, peut-être des centaines de millions de personnes de la pauvreté avec un régime qui n'est pas peut-être le plus démocratique. Et c'est le cas, lorsqu'on regarde en arrière, de la plupart des pays d'Asie, qui sont aujourd'hui des pays émergents. Ils ont été sortis de la pauvreté par des régimes qui étaient assez dirigistes, disons comme ça, en tout cas qui ne sont pas tout à fait considérés, en tout cas selon les codes d'aujourd'hui, comme des pays démocratiques, en tout cas qui répondent à la bonne gouvernance dans l'ère du temps. Alors, cette question m'amène à réfléchir un peu aujourd'hui à ce que lorsque nous parlons de mondialisation, de toutes les dérives de la mondialisation, parce que depuis presque une quarantaine d'années, nous vivons sous on va appeler ça comme ça, sous le diktat de la mondialisation. C'est-à-dire, c'est la mondialisation qui guide les règles, les choix et tout. Mais lorsqu'on voit ce qui se passe aujourd'hui aux États-Unis, donc plus haut niveau, la politique que prône aujourd'hui le président Trump, mais aussi, vous avez rappelé quelques cas avec le Brexit ou d'autres pays en Europe. À côté de ça, lorsqu'on voit que quelques-unes des plus grandes multinationales de la planète ne payent pratiquement pas d'impôts, ces multinationales opèrent partout, mais aussi en Afrique, donc font de l'argent en Afrique, ne payent pas d'impôts. Alors on se pose des questions sur, à la longue, comment les États, quelle politique les États peuvent mettre en œuvre pour construire des nations viables. Pour construire une nation viable, vous avez parlé d'éducation et de santé. Mais il faut aussi un certain nombre d'infrastructures de base, surtout pour des pays qui sont des pays qui ont besoin de se construire, qui sont dans les phases, disons, initiales du développement. Donc, alors, lorsqu'on met tout ceci ensemble, je pense qu'il est important que dans un forum comme celui-là, ou dans d'autres lieux en tout cas, on ait ce débat sur la gouvernance. Loin de moi l'idée de dire qu'il ne faut pas de démocratie ou de règles, mais je pense qu'il faut que nous regardions les règles, parce que les pays africains, on ne va pas toujours disons, donner comme excuse ce qui se passe ailleurs, mais ce qui se passe ailleurs, il faut le reconnaître, influence grandement nos pays.
Okay, Mr. Prime Minister, in the interest of time, unfortunately.
Je voudrais terminer, juste si vous permettez, par rappeler à tous les participants qu'il y a un side event sur la Guinée aujourd'hui à 17h, ici, à l'Intercontinental. Je vous remercie de votre aimable attention.
Thank you for that. And I think an important issue that was raised there, again, is accountability, corporate accountability. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to get this opportunity. And also I want to thank the organizers of this very important meeting. And also I thank the panelists which came across with different ideas from their own different perspectives and from their own different backgrounds. I know that we are not going to give a tailored solution for African problems. But we pull together the ideas, the conference like this, to solve different barriers, challenges that we are facing in Africa. This is African CEO Forums, which is talking about Africa, the challenges of Africa. So I'm not expecting a single solution from different people, from different backgrounds, which also different challenges that we are facing. Having said that, I heard the discussions, very important, very enlightening discussions, but I am for a combined solutions. So this forum is one of the one forum that we should combine different ideas to solve the African problems. Africans we are latecomers. We are latecomers to the world economy. So we have to use this latecomer advantage. Latecomer advantage, we should not go to the way Europeans did it. We should not go to the way Americans did it. There are a lot of things that we have learned. But I still believe that we have our own peculiar character, peculiar situation in Africa. So even if we are part of the world, we need our own way to solve our own problems. That's one thing. The issue of education, very important, very important. Unlike Mr. Moy said, in Ethiopia, our students are learning, 70% of universities are learning in science, in engineering. And I believe this is very important also. Engineering, power is very important, not in terms of politics also. As African Development Bank had said, in Africa, not only needs power to stay in power. Power is very important to change the whole economic, socio-economic situation of Africa. That's why we are constructing the biggest dam in Africa. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. All right, so ladies and gentlemen, you've heard it here today. We don't need to be reinventing the business model. We need better governance. We need to support agriculture. We need to educate our youth, and we need to hold our political leaders accountable and our business leaders accountable too. You've been listening to Mo Ibrahim, Nagib Siwaris, Saran Kebet Kulibali, Pierre Gislan, and also Abebe Emro Selassie from the IMF. Please give them the warmest acknowledgement and applause. And give yourselves an applause. You've been a fantastic audience in the plenary this morning. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been asked to tell you that the next session begins in the next 15 minutes. The next session begins in 15 minutes' time.
Baby, feel me. can quench my body's thirst.